I stood frozen in the middle of the crowded ballroom, my back slick with cold sweat. The lights felt too bright, the voices too loud. Up on the stage, my father, Quill, raised his glass with a smile so wide it almost looked painful. His voice rang out clear and proud through the microphone. Today, we officially hand over the entire future of Quill and Ember to my daughter Elowen. She is the one who will carry our family flame even higher. The room erupted. Applause thundered. People cheered. Glasses clinked, like celebration itself was exploding around me. And I couldn't move. My mother, Zephyrine Quill, turned her head just slightly in my direction. She gave me one small, polite nod, the kind you give to a stranger who held the door open for you. Nothing more. No pride. No acknowledgement. Just that. 12 years of my life disappeared in that single nod. I felt my chest tighten until breathing hurt. My fingers clenched around the stem of the champagne glass so hard I thought it might snap. Memories rushed in without warning. Nights I fell asleep at my desk, with fabric samples still clutched in my hand. Weekends. I canceled dates with Draven because a supplier threatened to walk away. Mornings. I stood alone in the empty workshop at 5 a.m., staring at the numbers, begging the bank for one more month, pouring every dollar I had back into a company that was slowly dying. All of it. Every sacrifice. Every sleepless night. Every dream I quietly buried, so Quill and Ember could survive. And now, they were giving it away. To Elowen. My younger sister stood beside our father on that brightly lit stage, glowing in a crimson silk dress, laughing softly as people rushed forward to congratulate her. She looked perfect, confident, effortless. The golden child who had never once stayed late to fix a production error. Never once negotiated with angry creditors. Never once tasted the metallic fear of watching a 8-year-old family legacy almost burn to the ground. But she was the one they chose. A wave of nausea hit me so violently I had to lock my knees to stay standing. This wasn't just business. This was my blood on that stage. My sweat. My youth. My entire adult life. Being publicly erased in front of everyone who mattered. The applause kept growing. Louder. Happier. I felt invisible. Small. Like I had never existed in this story at all. That was the exact moment something deep inside me cracked, and then went terrifyingly quiet. Because right then I finally understood the cruelest truth of all. Blood doesn't always protect the fire. Sometimes, blood is what puts it out. I didn't cry. Not there. Not in front of them. Instead, I turned slowly, my heels clicking against the polished marble floor. Each step felt heavier than the last. The celebration noise faded behind me as I pushed through the heavy double doors and stepped into the dimly lit hallway. In my right hand, I gripped the old brass key to the original workshop, the small, worn building where everything had begun 12 years ago. The metal was warm from my palm, as if it still remembered every late night I had spent there alone, sanding wood until my fingers bled, sketching designs until my eyes burned. No one followed me. No one even seemed to notice I had left. I stopped in the middle of the empty corridor, breathing slowly, deliberately. The key pressed hard into my skin, leaving deep red marks. This was the night the fire I had kept alive for so long was taken from me in front of everyone. Yet somewhere in the ashes of that moment, something else had already begun to stir. Something colder. Something quieter. Something no one in that glittering ballroom would ever see coming. I closed my fingers tighter around the key. And for the first time in 12 years, I stopped trying to save their flame. I drove home in complete silence. The city lights blurred past the car windows, but I barely saw them. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The old brass key from the workshop still pressed into my palm, leaving a sharp imprint I didn't want to let go of. When I finally stepped inside our apartment, Draven Solt was waiting. He took one look at my face and his smile faded instantly. Zephyrine, what happened? I didn't answer right away. I just closed the door behind me, kicked off my heels, and walked straight to the kitchen. Theo Langford, my oldest friend and the only person outside the family who knew how deep I had buried myself in Quill and Ember, was already there. He had come over for what was supposed to be a quiet celebration after the anniversary event. Now he stood by the counter, arms crossed, watching me with quiet concern. I poured myself a glass of water. My hands were still shaking. They gave it to her, I said finally, my voice low and flat. Everything. The company. The name. The future. All of it. To Elowen. Draven stepped closer, but I raised a hand gently, stopping him. I wasn't ready to be held yet. If he touched me, I was afraid the dam would break, and I couldn't let that happen. Not tonight. Instead, I listened. Because back at the family house, the real celebration had already begun. I could hear it even from our apartment across town, the faint sound of music and laughter drifting through the open windows in my mind. My parents had turned the entire estate into a lavish party for the new era. Aunt Thalira's sharp laugh cut through the air. Cousin Briarwyn was probably already posting photos with Elowen, calling her the future of the Quill legacy. They had invited everyone, every major client, every longtime supplier, every person who mattered in our world, and they were toasting to Elowen as if she had single-handedly saved the company. I didn't go back. I couldn't. So I stayed home, and I listened to the pieces of conversation that Draven and Theo quietly shared with me later that night. Small fragments they had overheard when they briefly stopped by the house to check on me. She deserves a bright start, my mother had said to one of the board members, her voice warm and proud. Elowen has such vision. Zephyrine? Well, she did what a firstborn daughter should do. She carried the responsibility until her sister was ready. Carried the responsibility. That was all I had been to them. A bridge. A placeholder. A pair of hands that worked quietly in the dark so the golden child could shine in the light. Later, when the apartment grew quiet, I slipped into my small home office. I opened the old filing cabinet I had moved here years ago, the one no one ever touched. My fingers moved through yellowed folders until I found them. The contracts. My signature on every single one. The emergency loan I had personally guaranteed when the bank wanted to pull out. The supplier agreements I had renegotiated at 2 a.m., so we wouldn't lose our raw materials. The desperate deal that saved us from bankruptcy 3 years ago, all signed by me. Zephyrine Quill. Not Elowen. Not my father. Me? I sat there on the cold floor, papers spread around me like fallen leaves, and felt something heavy settle deep in my chest. It wasn't loud rage. It was quieter. Heavier. Like ash slowly piling up inside my ribs. The next morning, I did something I had never done before. I reached out in secret. First to old Mr. Harlan, the master craftsman who had taught me everything when I was still a scared two-year-old girl trying to save her family's dying legacy. I asked to meet him at the old workshop, away from prying eyes. Then I contacted Mira Draven's older sister, a sharp, successful businesswoman who had built her own empire without family handouts. I needed her perspective. I needed someone who wouldn't soften the truth. I met them both quietly over the following days. No drama, no tears, just calm questions and careful listening. I asked about contracts, about client relationships, about what really made Quill and Ember valuable. I listened more than I spoke, all while smiling politely when my mother called to ask why I hadn't attended the celebration, all while telling Draven, I'm fine, when he looked at me with worried eyes, all while pretending to the world that I was simply tired from the long anniversary week. Inside, the pressure kept building. Every laugh I heard from the family house felt like another handful of dirt thrown on the fire I once protected. Every time Elowen posted about her new chapter as the face of Quill and Ember, something inside me grew colder and clearer. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to burn myself out trying to prove I deserved what was already mine. No, I would watch. I would wait. And when the time came, I would not burn with the fire they stole from me. I would let their ashes fall. Quietly. Completely. On their own. The days after the announcement passed in a strange, heavy silence. I moved through them like a shadow in my own life, smiling when I needed to, answering calls from suppliers with the same steady voice I had used for years. But inside, something had shifted. The fire I once protected so fiercely had turned into something colder, sharper. I started with Theo Langford. We met late one evening in a small, unremarkable cafe on the edge of town. No one would recognize us there. Theo spread the transfer documents across the wooden table, his lawyer's eyes scanning every line with quiet precision. I watched his face as he read. When he finally looked up, there was a flicker of surprise in his eyes. There are small gaps, he said carefully. Not enough to invalidate the transfer outright, but enough to create leverage. Some signatures were rushed. A couple of clauses about intellectual property and brand legacy were left vague. If handled correctly, It could buy you time. Or options. I didn't speak for a long moment. My fingers traced the edge of one document, the one with my signature from 3 years ago, when I had saved the company from collapse. The paper felt thin now, almost fragile. Good, I whispered. Keep digging. Quietly. At the same time, I began reaching out in ways no one would notice. Old Mr. Harlan helped me without asking too many questions. He arranged discreet conversations with 3 of our most important longtime clients. People who had worked with Quill and Ember for decades because of the quality of craftsmanship, not because of flashy marketing. I spoke to them one by one, never criticizing Elowen directly, only reminding them gently who had personally overseen every detail of their last collections. They listened. Some of them remembered the nights I had driven to their warehouses myself when deliveries were delayed. They remembered my hands stained with wood finish and lacquer. Meanwhile, Elowen was everywhere. She posted photos of her vision meetings, talking about rebranding Quill and Ember with bold, modern designs, bright colors, trendy shapes, the kind of flashy aesthetic that looked beautiful on social media but made traditional clients nervous. She talked about taking the brand to the next level. I felt a sharp twist in my chest every time I saw those posts. One afternoon, I was at the old workshop picking up some forgotten files when I overheard my mother's voice drifting from the main office next door. The door was slightly ajar. I froze in place, hidden by a tall cabinet of oak samples. Elowen is the future, Vespera said softly, her tone full of warmth I had rarely heard directed at me. She brings energy this company needs. Zephyrine. She was only ever a temporary bridge, a responsible older daughter who held things together until her sister was ready to shine. The words landed like a blade sliding slowly between my ribs. I stood there, completely still, as the familiar scent of sawdust and varnish filled my lungs. My throat burned. My eyes stung. But I didn't cry. I simply let the pain settle deeper, turning it into something useful, something cold and deliberate. That night, the weight in my chest felt almost unbearable. I drove back to the old workshop long after midnight. The building was dark and silent, the way it used to be when I would stay late fixing problems no one else knew about. I walked through the familiar space, my footsteps echoing softly on the concrete floor. On a workbench near the back, I found the last prototype I had designed before the announcement. A beautiful dining chair with clean, elegant lines and hand-carved details that took me weeks to perfect. My fingers brushed over the smooth wood, tracing the curves I had shaped with my own hands. I stood there alone in the dim moonlight coming through the high windows, holding that chair sample like it was a piece of myself. The betrayal felt so deep now. It was almost peaceful. Not because it hurt less, but because I had finally stopped hoping it would hurt less. I closed my eyes and whispered into the quiet darkness. Cho tàn có thể làm nên ngọn lửa mới. The words hung in the air for a long moment. I wasn't going to rush in and fight them head on. That would only feed their narrative that I was bitter or unstable. No, I would prepare something much quieter, much sharper, a blade hidden in the shadows. And when the time was right, I would let it fall exactly where it needed to. The silence I had carried for weeks finally broke. Not with shouting, but with quiet, deliberate movement. I stopped waiting. One rainy Thursday morning, I sat down at the old wooden table in the workshop with old Mr. Harlan and Mira Solt. No dramatic speeches. Just papers, quiet voices, and a decision that had been forming in the dark for too long. That day, Ember and Quill Reborn was born. It wasn't loud. It wasn't flashy. I filed the papers quietly, using the small legal gaps Theo Langford had found. Old Mr. Harlan brought 3 master craftsmen who had worked with me for years, men who knew every grain of wood I had ever touched. Mira Solt helped structure the company with the kind of sharp clarity only someone who built her own empire could offer. Word spread slowly, the way good craftsmanship always does. One by one, the longtime artisans began to appear at the old workshop. They didn't come with anger. They came with their tools and their quiet loyalty. "We know who kept the real flame alive," one of them said simply, as he set his toolbox down. Several of our most valued traditional clients followed not because I asked them to choose sides, but because they remembered whose hands had actually delivered the quality they paid for. I felt a strange mix of relief and fear every time another person walked through the door. Relief, because I wasn't alone. Fear, because I was finally crossing a line I could never uncross. Meanwhile, back at Quill and Ember, things were beginning to crack. Elowen moved fast. Too fast. She pushed for bold redesigns, bright finishes, and trendy collections that look stunning in photos, but compromise the structural integrity our clients had trusted for decades. I heard the whispers through old contacts, delayed deliveries, quality complaints, longtime buyers starting to hesitate. Every report that reached me felt like a dull ache in my chest. Not joy, not satisfaction, just a deep, tired sadness for the legacy that was slipping away. Then came the call I never expected. A major international furniture corporation, the one my parents had promised, would be Elowen's crowning achievement, reached out directly to me. They wanted to partner with the person who had actually maintained the brand's reputation for honest, handcrafted excellence. They wanted Ember and Quill reborn. When the email appeared in my inbox, I sat staring at the screen for a long time. My hands trembled slightly. This was the contract my father had once waved in front of Elowen like a trophy, the one he said would prove she was ready to lead. Now it was being offered to me. The pain of betrayal surged again, sharper than before. But this time, it didn't drown me. It settled into something colder, clearer, a calm so deep, it almost scared me. I was no longer fighting to be seen by them. I was building something they could no longer touch. Weeks later, on a quiet Saturday afternoon, Draven and I sat together at a small table in Mirasolt's office. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, falling across the legal documents spread before us. My hand hovered over the final signature line. For a moment, memories flooded in the night of the announcement. My mother's polite nod, my father's proud smile as he handed everything to Elowen. The sting of being called just a temporary bridge. The long nights I had spent saving what they were, now letting slip away. Draven placed his hand gently over mine. "You don't have to do this alone anymore," he said softly. I looked at him, then at Mirasolt, standing quietly by the window, and at the simple but powerful documents that represented an entirely new beginning. I signed. As I set the pen down, Nixara Hayes Draven's mother stepped closer. She had been watching everything with the calm strength only a woman who had built her own life could possess. She looked at me for a long moment, then spoke in a voice both gentle and firm. "Family isn't always blood, Zephyrine. Real family is the ones who choose to stay when the fire goes out." Her words landed softly, but they sank deep. Tears pricked at my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. Instead, I felt something inside me shift from the heavy weight of betrayal into a quiet, fierce determination to protect what truly mattered. Honest work, real loyalty, and the kind of legacy you build with your own hands. I looked at Draven, then at the freshly signed papers, and for the first time in months, I breathed easier. The fire had not been lost. It had simply been moved. And this time, it would burn on my terms. 6 months had passed. The city felt different now. Quieter in some ways, clearer in others. I stood at the far end of the grand exhibition hall, the lights of the International Furniture Showcase glowing softly around me. The air carried the familiar scent of polished wood, fresh lacquer, and subtle linseed oil. My team moved confidently around our booth, Ember and Quill reborn in their hands, adjusting the final details of pieces we had poured our hearts into. I no longer looked over my shoulder. But then I saw them. Across the wide aisle, the old Quill and Ember booth stood under harsher lighting. The displays looked overly bright, almost desperate. Elowen was there, smiling tightly at potential clients, her usual radiance dimmed by visible strain. Behind her stood my father, Cassian Quill, his shoulders slightly slumped, and my mother Vespera, whose perfectly composed face now carried deep lines of exhaustion. They had come face to face with reality. Quill and Ember had fallen into serious trouble. Costly mistakes in material choices, delayed deliveries, and growing complaints from longtime clients had eroded the reputation my family once took for granted. The crisis had forced them to confront what they had done. I felt a quiet ache bloom in my chest as I watched them. Not triumph, not bitterness, just the heavy sadness of seeing something once beautiful slowly crumble. They noticed me at the same moment. Elowen's eyes widened. My father froze mid-sentence. My mother's hand tightened around the edge of their display table. For a long moment, none of us moved. Then I walked slowly toward them, my steps measured, my hands relaxed at my sides. Draven stayed a few paces behind, giving me space. I stopped just at the edge of their booth, close enough to see the exhaustion in their eyes. My mother spoke first, her voice barely above a whisper. "Zephyrine." I looked at each of them, at the father who had once proudly announced my sister as the future, at the mother who had called me nothing more than a temporary bridge, at the sister who now stood in the ruins of a legacy she had never truly understood. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I didn't need to. Instead, I offered a small, calm smile and said softly, I didn't come to take back the old flame. I built a new one. From the ashes you left behind. The words hung between us like smoke. Elowen's lips parted, but no sound came. My father looked away, his jaw tight. My mother's eyes glistened for a brief second before she blinked it away. There was no shouting, no dramatic confrontation, just the quiet weight of truth settling over all of us. I turned and walked back to my own booth, my heart beating steadily. The pain was still there, a dull, lingering ache, but it no longer controlled me. It had become part of the foundation I now stood on. Later that evening, in the warm glow of our new workshop, the air smelled of fresh cedar and lemon oil. Soft light spilled across the finished pieces' chairs, with elegant, hand-carved details. Tables that told stories in every grain. Draven stood beside me. Calix Reyes raised her glass with that familiar, mischievous sparkle in her eyes. Mira Solt watched us all with quiet pride. I lifted my own glass, looking at the small group of people who had chosen to stand with me when the fire had gone out. To the ones who stay, I said, my voice steady but thick with emotion. We clinked our glasses together. The sound was soft, warm, and real. As I took a slow sip, I felt the last heavy chains of the past loosen and fall away. The quiet revenge I had chosen wasn't about destruction. It was about creation. It was about proving that silent work, honest hands, and a heart that refused to break could build something stronger than blood ties ever could. In the end, family isn't defined by the name you're born with. It's defined by who chooses to stay, when the flames die, and who helps you light a new one. I looked around the workshop at the golden light dancing across wood that my team and I had shaped with care and respect, and for the first time in years, I felt truly free. The old fire had faded. But this one was mine, and it would burn bright, steady, and true, for as long as I chose to keep it alive. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. We appreciate you more than you think. If this tale stirred something deep inside, we invite you to remain part of this frontier of memories. More true stories of honor, compassion, and destiny are waiting for you here. Subscribe, share, comment, and thank you for riding with us today. Aviso Legal, disclaimer. Our content is designed for artistic and entertainment purposes and may reinterpret historical themes using fictional touches. We apply AI tools thoughtfully, only to support production while keeping human supervision over editing, emotional tone, and narrative coherence. We always comply with regulatory guidelines for AI-based media and avoid deepfake practices or identity manipulation. All supporting components remain legally sourced. Please ask for authorization before sharing or adapting any segment. Your respect makes it possible for us to continue telling meaningful stories.